All
Okay.
right, guys. I think we're live. All right, let's just wait a sec now for it to kick into YouTube. All right. All right,
Okay.
guys. I think we're live. We're live. So, welcome to What Do You Mean? For it to kick into YouTube. Let me mute this here. Okay. Welcome to What Do You Mean, guys? Thank you guys for coming to hang out. Today we got David Wood from Acts 17 Apologetics, along with Robert Spencer from Jihad Watch. And today we're going to be discussing the Tommy Robinson arrest and kind of the impact that has and what it has to do with Islam. So we're going to go ahead and hold off a little bit for question and answers for the questions until closer towards the end. And then we'll get to those. So make sure you guys stick around. And let's now start. Let's start with you, Robert, and let's talk about who is Tommy Robinson, or Tommy Robinson, for all those who don't know who he is.
Did you say
Tommy
start
Rob
with Robert?
I was thinking Tony Robbins in my mind for
Okay.
some weird reason.
Tony What?
Tommy Robinson.
Tommy Robinson is a working class Englishman who was born in Luton, which is a heavily Muslim area, and grew up there, saw what was happening to his country as a result of mass Muslim migration, founded a few years back a group he called the English Defence League, which was designed to offer resistance to violent Muslims who were actually attacking returning soldiers during the Veterans Day, not Veterans Day, what do they call it? Armistice Day celebrations, or Remembrance Day, it's called in Britain. And the English Defence League was specifically meant to fight back, which got it called by the British establishment political elites and the media a neo-Nazi group, which it never was, although it did attract unsavory elements, as might be expected given the circumstances. And ultimately, Tommy broke with the group because he said that he was unable to keep out anti-Semites and actual neo-Nazis, which he never was. After that, he had an unfortunate dalliance with the Quilliam Foundation, which is a pseudo-moderate organization, moderate Muslim organization in Britain that claimed to have decapitated, interesting choice of words, the EDL, or English Defence League, at the time when he left it. It turned out later that Tommy was placed under tremendous pressure from the British government to separate from the EDL and to embrace moderate Islam, which he attempted to do with Quilliam. But Tommy was honest enough to acknowledge, once he got to know the Quilliam Foundation people, that they were not being on the level about Islam's violent teachings, and he broke with them. And since then, he has been on his own, as far as I know, as a commentator on events, and he co-authored a book about the Quran, and he worked for a time for Rebel Media, the very excellent Canadian organization run by Ezra Levant, doing various videos, and then recently struck out on his own, making videos, and this is what got him in trouble with the police this time. He had been ordered previously to not to report outside the trials of Muslim rape gangs in Britain. Of course, those rape gangs have been the subject of a massive cover-up by British authorities, who were more worried about being called racist and Islamophobic than they were about the future of their very nation and the well-being of literally tens of thousands of young girls who were brutalized by these gangs and their lives ruined. And so he was arrested some time ago and told not to report outside these trials. He went and reported again outside these trials. The prohibition on him doing so was illegitimate in the first place, and consequently, he was arrested again. The technical reasons for his arrest are that he did violate the terms of his probation, but because the terms of his probation were unjust to start with, and based on attempts to cover up, ongoing attempts to cover up the reality of Muslim rape gangs, many people in Britain have risen up and are not taking this in stride. Thousands of people demonstrated the other day demanding that he be released. He was very swiftly, under quite suspicious circumstances, sentenced to 13 months in prison within hours of his being arrested. And he's in prison now. Many Britons have pointed out that the whole thing sounds like something that would have happened in Stalinist Russia, and consequently they are very angry about it and are demanding that this preferential treatment given to the Islamic community in regard to the rape gangs be ended, that Tommy be freed, and that in the larger sense that the truth about what's happening to Britain as a result of mass Muslim migration be told and no longer covered up either by authorities or by the media.
Yeah, and a lot of people online have been saying that it's likely that he can end up murdered inside of prison. What are your thoughts on that? What are kind of the Muslim gangs in prison, that sort of thing?
Yeah, you know, Muslims rule the British prisons, and they proselytize for jihad groups, and they do all this openly, and British authorities do nothing. And recently, Paul Golding, who is the head of a group called Britain First, was also sentenced to prison for protesting against Muslim rape gangs. And he was immediately attacked and his nose broken in prison by violent Muslims. And so it's a very real possibility that Tommy, who when he was in prison before they threatened to kill him, they very well could do so this time. And so people are saying this is essentially a death sentence. The government is trying to get this inconvenient man out of the way. It is a pattern perhaps with the rulers of Britain going back to the martyrdom of St. Thomas Becket, who King, I believe it was Henry IV, said very famously, "Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest?" And people went and killed him, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And Tommy is kind of in the Becket role today. And it does many, many people in Britain believe that the government is hoping that he will be killed so that they will be rid of this meddlesome journalist.
Gotcha. Yeah. And before he was arrested, he was reporting about grooming gangs.
Yeah.
Wood, can you explain a little bit about what the grooming gangs are?
The grooming gangs, that in itself is a euphemism, John. They're rape gangs. They are gangs of Muslims who are going around in Britain, and they take advantage of little girls, sometimes 10, 12, 13, 14 years old. And they turn them into prostitutes and essentially sex slaves in accord with, of course, the Quran's teachings about how infidel women can be used as sex slaves. And one of them even said not long ago that he would quote the man who was victimizing her, would quote the Quran to justify what he was doing. I know David is going to explain more about that, so I will defer. But that is really what's happening, and the British government is intent on making sure that as few people know about it as possible.
Sure.
Yeah, John, you have a lot of things working together that have given rise to the situation of the grooming gangs. As Robert pointed out, you have in the Muslim sources that you can rape your female captives. You can take women, young girls captive in battle. You can buy and sell them. So you have things like that in the Muslim sources, where if you are a Muslim and you conquer an area and you capture women or girls, you're allowed to use them as your sex slaves. And this was brought up even in chapter 4, verse 24 of the Quran, where a question was brought to Muhammad: what happens when we catch both the women and their husbands? And you don't see this much from the verse, but when you look at the historical background and that the verse was meant to answer, the question was, what do we do when we capture both the men and the women? In other words, the women and their husbands. And the response from Allah was, yes, married women are forbidden to you as sex partners. Married women are forbidden to you, Muslims, unless you capture them. So if you sort of seize them, then it's all okay. But apart from that, because this is kind of a different situation, this isn't like Muslims have already gone out and captured Great Britain, although they, of course, view themselves with some good reason as doing that right now. I think it really goes down to more along the lines of teachings like chapter 98, verse 6, which calls Jews and Christians the worst of creatures, right? If you're the worst of creatures, if you're lower than a pig, you're lower than a dog, you're lower than a plant, right? If that's what you are, why should anyone be concerned about treating you well or treating you nicely? And so you take that and you combine it with chapter 3, verse 110 of the Quran, which says that Muslims are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. And the picture you have in your head, if you take these seriously, are Muslims are really, really good and everyone else is pure scum. So who cares if you're out there raping this little dirty scum kafir girl, right? Apart from that, I think there's that ultimately derives from that is that there's a psychological component, right? And what I mean here is, if you look at the Muslim sources and ask, according to the Muslim sources, how is the world supposed to proceed? Well, from the time of Muhammad, Islam was just supposed to keep expanding and keep expanding and keep expanding until it takes over the entire world. And Islam kept expanding very rapidly during the early years, and then, I mean, expanded all the way out east till it started hitting India and China, expanded in the west until it went all the way across northern Africa and up into Europe. So it was expanding very, very rapidly, and then all of a sudden, people started standing up in those areas, and then Islam sort of hit some roadblocks. From a Muslim perspective, it didn't look like this was what was supposed to happen, but Islam was stopped. And then after that, you had, of course, once you get down to the modern period, you have the Muslim world really being just technologically backwards, military-wise. These places are backwards. Western nations are far more powerful economically, militarily. And from a Muslim perspective, you read the Muslim sources, and this isn't the way things are supposed to be. This is just not the way that things are supposed to be. So you have to be thinking that Allah has some sort of plan behind this. But right now, you have people immigrating from places like Pakistan, and they have a kind of inferiority complex here, in the sense that, wait a minute, we're supposed to be in control over you. You're not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be taking us in. We're supposed to be ruling over you. We're supposed to be ruling the world. And I think how that plays out is they're not getting to rule the world as they should, according to Islam, where they're the best of peoples and we're the worst of creatures, where we're their dhimmis. We do what they tell us we can do. It's not happening that way. And I think it's causing problems because when they get in a situation where they get power over a 9-year-old girl or a 10-year-old girl or an 11-year-old girl, then it's a situation of, here's where I do get to be an authority over you. Here's where I get to show you my real status, and I get to show you your real status according to Islam. And you end up with all kinds of abuse. And the other component to all of this is that Western nations are so terrified of being called bigots that they'll just let this go on over and over and over again. Because if you come out and say, hey, there are massive gangs of Muslims who are raping young girls, you're a bigot. Even though it's true, you're a bigot and you're an Islamophobe. Even though it's true, even though what you're saying is entirely 100% true, you can't say it. And I think that is what's feeding the situation with Tommy. Doesn't matter if what you're saying is true. We just don't want you saying it. And so that's the situation.
Yeah, and Tommy got kicked off of Twitter for quoting some statistics or something like that. Is that right?
Tommy got kicked off of Twitter for saying Islam promotes killing.
That's right.
And that was the actual quote where they said, we're banning you from Twitter permanently for saying this, Islam promotes killing. And I spent several days after that posting the same thing and then supporting it with quotations, right? So I would quote Muhammad. I would put it up on the screen. Here's Muhammad saying, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. Hey, Twitter, does this verse commanding people to kill apostates promote killing? Yes or no? I'd want to know. Because it's indisputable, right? It's indisputable that a command to kill apostates promotes killing. That's indisputable. You can't deny that, right? You'd have to throw out all laws of logic if you want to say that a command to kill doesn't promote killing, right? But now notice, the question there was not, hey, is he right? It's just, you're not allowed to say it. You're not allowed to say what is a complete and obvious fact if you've read the Muslim sources. If anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him, clearly promotes killing. And but you can't say it.
But when you quoted them, you didn't get banned, right?
No, and that shows that there are people who are targeting him, right? Because I posted it over and over and over again, I was adding Twitter. So I'm sending these directly to Twitter, and tons of people are retweeting them, which means they're going to Twitter again. And no matter what happened, I couldn't get banned. So there is, so on the one hand, Twitter is banning people for saying certain things, but on the other hand, they are targeting specific people, right? Because at the end of the day, Twitter's a business, right? They don't want to just start banning everyone who says something about Islam. They're going to lose like what, a third of their users or something like this, and then their stocks plummet, and then they go out of business. So they have to be kind of careful when they're doing this. They have to select certain individuals and then to block them. So that's why you and I are still on there, Robert. They haven't targeted us, right?
I also think we're still on there because we are Americans. And that it's not that Twitter won't ban Americans, but if you look at some of the high-profile people that Twitter has banned, you've got Milo, who's English. You've got Paul Golding and Jada Franson from Britain First. They're English. You've got Shazia Hobbs, who is an ex-Muslim from England and who lives there now. You've got Tommy. And so I think that when you look at that, and there are others I could name as well, I would suspect that the British government is nudging Twitter and saying, get rid of these people who are causing us trouble.
And from their side, they're thinking that if you mention something about Islam being bad, then it enables the jihadists in some way. So given that, what do you guys think about that as being a possible solution for peace, I guess, is just ignore it and hope it goes away?
The problem is that all these things that David quoted and many others, like the Quran saying, kill them wherever you find them 3 times, at chapter 2, 191, chapter 4, verse 89, and chapter 9, 5, and so many other places where the Quran commands killing and the subjugation of unbelievers in chapter 9, verse 29, and be merciful to the Muslims, but harsh to the unbelievers, chapter 48, verse 29, and on and on and on and on. Those things are going to still be there, even if we stop talking about them. Muslims are going to still read the Quran and still act upon it. And so the jihad will keep coming. We just won't be able to say anything in resistance.
Gotcha.
And I want to add that people don't understand really what they're doing when they start stamping out free speech, right? They really think, oh, we don't want Islamophobes speaking about Islam and causing all this, causing a bunch of a violent backlash against Muslims. So we're going to stop people from speaking. And they don't realize that is the opposite of what you need to do if you're concerned about Muslims, right? I don't want a violent backlash against Muslims who are walking down the street. I don't want that sort of thing. I'm horrified at that, but I understand the role that free speech plays in preventing that sort of thing. In the West, one of the things that has made the West great is that our default method of dealing with problems has become you talk about them, you protest, you debate, you speak. You fight when you have to, but other than that, when speaking will work, then you deal with problems with more speech. And there are places in the world and places historically that do not think that way. It's, oh, you disagree with me, you have to die, right? We have to fight over this. We have to fight to the death over this. You disagree with me, I'm going to kill you for it, right? And in the West, we've gotten past that to where you and I disagree. Well, let's debate it. Let's debate it. If I really, really disagree with you and we're not going to debate it, good, we'll protest or something like that. I'll expose your ideas as false. And what you have now are massive numbers of people in high places saying we can't allow the speaking because, this could lead to bad things. And they don't realize that once you start taking away speech as the default position, then people who are concerned about something are going to choose a different route, right? In other words, when there's a terrorist attack, I, of course, want the police and the government to stop the terrorist attack, right? I want them to go and round up the perpetrators. As far as what the rest of us do following a terrorist attack, I want us exposing the ideas that led to the terrorist attack. I want the ideas that led to the terrorist attack undermined and refuted so that in the coming generations, those ideas will already be undermined and exposed. When people start telling us, no, you can't talk about those things. You can't talk. You can't undermine the ideology. You can't speak about the ideology. You have to keep your mouth shut about the ideology. Well, then look at what we're doing. We're trying to respond to a problem with speech, with refutation of ideas. And they're telling us, don't do that. Well, guess what? There are people in this world, once they find out that this isn't a solution, that speaking is not allowed, they are going to turn to violence, right? That's not going to be me. That's not going to be Robert. That's not going to be the people who take us seriously. It's going to be people who say, the way that David and Robert and Pamela do these things, responding with speech, that's useless. That's outdated. It's not allowed. It doesn't work. We need a new method, and we just need a violent revolution. And so we're in the long run, we're the ones who are actually promoting peace towards Muslims who have nothing to do with jihad. We're the ones promoting peace. We're the ones kind of trying to protect them by just dealing with them on a level of speaking and not lashing out in violence. And the governments of the world and the media of the world and the educators in Hollywood are all saying, no, don't do it David and Robert and Pamela's way. Well, okay, but if you're not taking our route, you're going to take some other route, because people aren't just going to put up with it forever. Once people start getting scared for their children, for their civilization, they're going to want to do something. And if they're not allowed to speak about that, they're going to do something else.
Right. And what do you guys think about, because this is what gets me, is when people, so say when you guys criticize Islam and then some Muslims get upset about it and then they kill other people, it's just say that this kind of thing happens. Would that be your fault in your eyes?
That's what the government and media would have us believe, that yes, it's our fault, just like when President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem and Palestinians rioted on the border between Gaza and Israel, and people were killed who turned out to be Hamas operatives and not innocent civilians at all. But in any case, President Trump was widely blamed. And people were saying, you did this and you have the blood on your hands because you moved the embassy. So what they're essentially saying is you have to be held hostage to other people being violent. And it's your fault if they are violent. When anybody, if they really stop and think about it, they would realize that if someone is violent, it's their responsibility. If John, next time I see you, I slug you, that's my fault. And no matter how much I say, well, you know, John said these terrible things to me and I was just lashing out, nobody's going to buy that it was your fault. And yet when it comes to statecraft and foreign policy, people take it for granted that if Muslims riot and kill, therefore it is the responsibility and the fault of the people that they are complaining about, and the people they're complaining about have to change their behavior so that Muslims won't riot and kill. Now, that's just giving in to violent intimidation. All it's going to do is encourage more violent intimidation. And we learned in 5th grade, we've all forgotten, but we learned in 5th grade, you don't give in to the bully, then the bully will just keep bullying you. You have to fight him. You have to stand up. And otherwise, you're just going to encourage more bullying. And that's what we're doing on a global scale nowadays when we say, well, Muslims get violent if you talk about these things, therefore you must not talk about them. You're only going to make the Muslims see, oh, we can manipulate them through violence, and so let's threaten them about other things and say, if you don't start making your women wear headscarves, we will kill you. Or if you don't do this or that accords with Sharia, we will kill you. And finally, we're completely submitted.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think one of the things that if we think about it and we just kind of just ignore all criticism of Islam and ignore all these things and kind of give in to just what they kind of want, it's almost, in my mind, it doesn't make any sense how it will increase peace. If anything, you're just going to get more and more Muslims who are going to be more and more prepared to threaten and kill when that time comes around. To return it back to Tommy, though, Robert, I know you have a little bit more knowledge on this than I do, at least. What do you have to say about Tommy's arrest? Was it legal?
Yeah, technically it was legal because he wasn't on probation, and a condition of the probation was that he not video outside these rape gang trials, because the stated excuse is that this will somehow prejudice the judgment and give a chance for these rapists to walk. Well, actually, they've been walking for years. They haven't been prosecuted for years. They've been going around acting freely when police have declined to do anything, even though they knew about it for years, because the police were afraid of being called racist. It's because the British government wants to continue that situation that they are trying to silence any discussion of the rape gangs. And so, yeah, they have Tommy on a technicality, but it's only a technicality. It's like everything Hitler did in Nazi Germany was legal because he passed laws that were in favor of what he was doing. And he made sure that those laws were passed so that everything he did, he could point to the law and say he was completely within his rights and authority as the Chancellor and the Führer. And so it's the same thing in Britain now, and that's a very disquieting development that Britain is behaving like a totalitarian state. They do have the law on their side, but the whole premise of the thing is wrong. To silence free speech about the rape gangs and to make sure that as few people know about what's happening as possible. And this is how a totalitarian state behaves.
What about the... Oh, go ahead.
John, I just wanted to add something real quick because I'm thinking about, while Robert's talking about that, I was thinking about like the perspective of, you know, your average British citizen, right? If you, up until the news started breaking, lots of people in Great Britain didn't know these things were going on, didn't know that there were these Islamic rape gangs taking literally thousands of young girls and turning them into sex slaves. They had no idea that this was going on. And then this story started breaking about how the government, how the police and other government agencies are informed over and over and over again that this is going on, and how they just keep silencing the situation because they're worried about seeming like bigots and Islamophobes. So they would rather have young girls being constantly gang raped for years than be called names, right? So this is going on for years. And then the average person starts finding out about this. The average person in Great Britain didn't know that this was happening. And then a few years ago, when stories started breaking, they start finding out, wow, we really cannot trust our government to deal with this, right? We can't trust what our government tells us. We can't trust our government to respond the way that a government should, namely protecting their citizens. So people start realizing this, and they are rightly suspicious about how the government is dealing with this issue from that point on, right? I mean, when I hear the government screwing up like that, I'm thinking, wow, I really do not trust you guys. And what's the result? Well, the result is that as the trials are going on, you've got the government doing what they're claiming they're supposed to be doing, and you're concerned with whether they are doing a good job. So you want people reporting on what's going on, right? You want people standing outside the courthouse giving you updates. You want people keeping you updated. I want to know how the government is dealing with this problem. And then to learn, well, no one's allowed to speak about it. My goodness. I mean, you know, as bad as things get for free speech in the United States at times, they're nothing like they are in Europe right now. I mean, I couldn't even live there. And so I don't know how people are functioning right now in Great Britain. I mean, I would curl up into a ball if I were in that situation where I'm just no longer allowed to speak about gangs of people raping little girls, and you have to keep your mouth shut about it. So anyway, I feel bad for the people of Great Britain that's now the position that their government has put them in.
And that's go ahead, Robert.
Excuse me, John, but also what David is saying reminds me of the fact that I don't think we've mentioned yet that there's also a gag order in Britain about what happened to Tommy. It's come out that he was given this 13-month sentence in prison that could be his death sentence, and that he was tried and sentenced within a couple of hours of being arrested, which is extraordinary. Well, as Bruce Bauer said in Gatestone Institute's speedy injustice. The fact is that the British court then said that nobody could say this. Nobody could talk about it. And so there were British publications that had stories up about this already and had to take them down. And Breitbart News was very funny in that they took down their original story and then put redacted everywhere that Tommy Robinson's name appeared and pixelated his photo and put the story back up. So it says redacted, arrested for redacted, outside redacted. And everybody knows what's going on, or if they don't, then they go to find out. But it shows that the British government no longer has any respect for the freedom of speech and is absolutely desperate that the truth about these Muslim rape gangs not get out. That's why they targeted Tommy, and they appear to know how angry the British people will be once the large majority really knows what's been going on.
Yeah, that's just really crazy when you think about it. That not even allowed to talk about it.
I just wanted to point out, because when I started posting about Tommy just a couple days ago in some tweets, because I waited for several days after hearing that he was arrested and hearing the reason that he was arrested. I waited for several days, waiting for stories to come out, right? Because I was like, what? You can't be arrested for standing outside a courthouse reporting on a trial? Reporters do that in the United States every single day. So there's no way you can be arrested for that sort of thing. So I was waiting for this to come out on the major British news channels, and it just nothing, or it would be something, and then it would get taken down, but no real story as to his arrest and the trial and so on. And then it starts coming out that these things are being quieted down. But when I started just posting some quick tweets, there were actually British critics of Tommy who started defending it, talking about how this could interfere with the trial, and the jury could look up something that he said or something like that. And just think about how ridiculous that is, right? That you can't speak on something, you can't speak on an ongoing trial because it might interfere with the trial. Well, here in the United States, the judge tells people, hey, if you go home, you don't get to don't look up things about this trial. And if the person's going to disobey that, guess what? They can look at all the reports about these rape gangs, right? So it's not going to be Tommy who's informing them. The reports are already out there when the things happened, when the people were arrested. The information's already out there. And as I've heard, that's all Tommy was. Tommy wasn't giving any new information. He was giving information that was already out there. So the point is, there's no way that Tommy could actually interfere with the trial. If a judge tells you not to look at not to go out and look up on the internet information, a person decides to disregard the judge's order, well, then that person's going to find all that information anyway. It has nothing to do with Tommy. But apart from that, if you're really concerned with that, if you're really concerned this person is going to go home and find a bunch of information, then you would sequester the jury, right? You would say, the jury, you're on a kind of house arrest here, or something like that, where you don't get access to a computer or something like that. That's the step you would take if you were really concerned about a fair trial. That's the step you would take, so that people's free speech is not interfered with, right? So that you don't stop reporters. So those are the methods you would take. And here in the United States, if a trial is going on, the judge is worried about trial tampering, then he's going to take methods to make sure that the jury isn't getting certain news reports or something like that. It would never cross people's mind to shut down the media or to start arresting people in the media. So once again, it looks like things are much worse off in places like Great Britain than here in the U.S. So people in the U.S., when you think things are bad here, could be worse.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a legitimate concern. I think is what happens if the United States, if we don't protect free speech and we allow this kind of stuff to overturn. I mean, do you guys think it's a legit possibility that this could be starting to creep into the United States in some time?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. We're on the way. Yeah. There's really nothing preventing it, because in the U.S. we already have the concept of hate crime, and hate crime is based on speech. Hate crime, the very concept of hate crime, if we had a responsible Supreme Court, they would rule it unconstitutional, because hate crime depends on what you say, and that goes against the idea of the freedom of speech. Of course, freedom of speech is not entirely absolute. Direct calls for violence, direct incitement to violence, that kind of thing, that really ought to be illegal, and it is. But the idea that a crime is worse if I call you a name than it is if I just hit you without calling you a name, is opening the door to criminalizing various kinds of speech. And that is the road that Britain is already traveling very far down on.
You know, hey, John, let me give you another example of how things are in Europe. And what I'm really hoping is that Europe serves as if Europe does keep going this route, I'm hoping that that it serves as a kind of warning to the United States, right? That, in other words, kind of better you than us, right? If you guys are going to go down this route and think that shutting down speech and so on is the way to go, then I hope we look at the situation in 10 years and say to ourselves, well, no matter what else happens, we are not going down that route. But just to give you another example, I got a message from YouTube a couple of days ago that said that my video about Muhammad is banned in Germany, right? Now, the video is titled, I should probably make another video about this, but the video is titled, Muhammad was a sex addict. And in the video, I post Muslim sources, not Christian sources, not Jewish sources, not atheist sources. I quote multiple passages from Sahih al-Bukhari, their main source on the life of Muhammad, saying that Muhammad would have sex with 9 or 11 women and girls in a single day. And then he's apparently bragging about it because his followers know that he's doing it. And his followers are bragging that he has the sexual strength of 30 men. And I simply point out in the video that we would call a person who's having sex with 9 or 11 women and girls in a single day, we would call him a sex addict. Now, that's everything that I said in the video. And I got a message from YouTube saying that there has been a legal challenge from Germany to that video, and that the YouTube legal team has examined the law and found out that my video is indeed not allowed in Germany. And so they tell me that my video will no longer be allowed to be played in Germany. Now, think about this. This video is not saying kill Muslims. It's not saying anything about Muslim people. It's talking about Muhammad. It's quoting sources on Muhammad, and then it's coming to a kind of conclusion about it. Well, we would call a person like that a sex addict. And if this were anyone else other than Muhammad, it would be perfectly acceptable, right? If someone found out, if a news story broke tomorrow that Donald Trump once had sex with 9 women and girls in a single day, it would be on every single headline in the entire world. It would never cross anyone's mind to say, this isn't allowed to be reported in certain countries. It would never cross anyone's mind. But that is what happens in Germany if you talk about Muhammad. So now notice. So they're not saying, hey, don't speak about Muslims, don't criticize Muslims, don't incite violence against Muslims. They're saying you can no longer legally say something, even if it's entirely true about Muhammad, in the country of Germany. The German government will stop you from saying it in Germany. And so the point is, it's not just the United Kingdom. These things are happening over and over and over again in European countries. And yeah, here in the U.S., we might be the last real free speech zone in the world, given all the problems that we have now. Again, we're still light years ahead of places in Europe when it comes to free speech.
Wood, I think what you need to do is you need to redo the video specifically for the German audience and call it Checks instead of sex. So call him a Checks addict and just do the whole video over again.
hey, I should redo it and do the entire video in German.
Yeah, that's what you should do. Hey, so what do you guys think that we can do here in the United States to try to preserve this this kind of free speech, or do you think that it's too late, or what are you guys' kind of thoughts on that?
Well, as the great philosopher Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. And it's not too late. We still are able to speak. Of course, anybody who does speak about these issues honestly is stigmatized and demonized as a racist, bigoted, Islamophobe, and so on, and marginalized as a result. And so we have to fight against that as well. But the main thing that I think we need to be vigilant about right now is to try to keep hate speech ordinances from being passed, whether locally or nationally. It's increasingly common that I hear, speaking on campuses or elsewhere, people saying hate speech is not free speech. And they think of hate speech as some readily, objectively identifiable quantity, and that it consists essentially of anything that dissents from the leftist agenda. So that, as David's video illustrates, if you say things that are unwelcome about Muhammad, even if they're demonstrably true and come from Muslim sources, then that's hate speech and has to be proscribed, has to be rendered illegal. We are very close to this kind of thing in the United States. I would say that a large majority of university students today probably do believe that hate speech is not free speech, does not merit First Amendment protection, and does not have First Amendment protection. And so wherever there are attempts to criminalize or even just to stigmatize so-called hate speech, we need to be energetic in trying to illustrate to people the implications of what they're saying in terms of how they would destroy a free society by creating a protected class that is immune from criticism. Then that protected class can do whatever it wants and nobody can say anything in response. And that's an authoritarian state, not a free society at all. So the educational effort is the only thing I really can recommend at this point. Like David was saying, that we are really the people who are protecting Muslims and protecting free society at this point, because the alternative to what we're saying, if you cannot say these things, then what John F. Kennedy said so many years ago will be proven abundantly true, that if you make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable. And so this is the case here. If we cannot speak the truth about these things, then other people who we do not approve of or endorse will come after us and make it impossible for these lies to continue to be spoken, but do so in a violent manner. I hope that doesn't happen, but that is the road we are traveling on.
And I really hope that some people stand up, and I'm not talking about the just ordinary citizens. I'm talking about like reporters, right? I mean, if I were a journalist working for the BBC and I saw a guy get arrested, tried, sentenced, and imprisoned, and then I was told that I would have to shut up about it, I would have to say, no, I'm actually going to report on this. And if you want to lock me up, you can lock me up too. And I have a friend, and after you lock me up and tell the nation no one can report on that, well, he's going to report on it anyway, and then you can lock him up. And eventually people will get sick enough of it. Because the real problem is that these things happen gradually, and not enough people in places like that, in positions where they could do something about it, not enough people do anything about it. But at the end of the day, Westerners really do value their free speech. And so you have to kind of take it away gradually, step by step. If you just took it all away, at once, there would be riots in the streets or something like that. So they have to kind of do this step by step, gradually and quietly, and keep things quiet. And I mean, my goodness, if you're a British journalist and you're told to keep quiet about these things, and you do, well, guess what? They're not stopping with Tommy Robinson. Let me put it that way, right? This doesn't, now we've got Tommy locked up. Now we can stop what we're doing as far as controlling the media. No, this shows them, wow, this is the way to get what we want. And so if you don't take a stand now, you guys are all responsible, right? All these guys are, if they stand by and do nothing, they all bear a portion of the responsibility down the road, that they didn't stand up for free speech when they had the opportunity. So we still have the opportunity right now. And so certainly no time to back down. You're talking all future generations are affected by the decisions we make. Our children are affected by the decisions we make. And if we don't stand up for our rights, then guess what? They're the ones who have fewer rights in the future, right? And so, we've got to stand up.
A lot of people don't realize that protecting free speech is good for everyone, right? And so the people that are against Tommy Robinson and all them for utilizing free speech, what do you guys think that they have at stake for themselves?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yeah. So the critics of free speech and for the critics against those who criticize Islam, how does this work against them?
Well, ultimately, they might find that their positions are unpopular or unacceptable to the government, and then they're going to be shut up. And by then, there'll be ample precedent for doing so. And so nobody will be there to speak for them. The thing is, John, what I wanted to say was what David says about it happening gradually is already happening in the United States as well as around the world. If you think back in 1989, I know that's way before your time, but in 1989, Salman Rushdie got the fatwa, the death fatwa, put on his head by the Islamic Republic of Iran for his novel, The Satanic Verses, which was based on the Satanic Verses incident in Muhammad's life, where he gave a revelation of the Quran that he changed his mind about later, and then said that he had been inspired by Satan. The Ayatollah Khomeini thought that Rushdie's book was blasphemous and put a price on his head. And he lived in hiding for years. The price is still on his head, although it's been so many years now, apparently he doesn't think he's going to get killed, and he's out in the open. But this is the point, John. At that time, back in 89, everyone was angry with the Ayatollah Khomeini and with Iran and defending the freedom of speech and indignant that anybody would want to kill Rushdie simply for saying something that was critical of Islam. Now, if you fast forward to 2005, 6, 7, when the Muhammad cartoons were published in the Jyllands-Posten Danish newspaper, and then there were riots by Muslims around the world and innocent people were killed, almost every newspaper in the West declined to republish the cartoons and said it was out of respect for Islam and for Muslims. But this was a real significant retreat from the defense of freedom of speech that everybody took for granted in 1989. And they were saying essentially, we're afraid you're gonna kill us, so we will not do anything that you think to be critical of Islam. And then if you fast forward another 10 years to 2015, when Pamela Geller and I put on the Muhammad Art Exhibit and Cartoon Contest in Garland, Texas, and jihadis attacked it and were killed in the parking lot, or else they would have killed all of us. Then after that, for the next week, on all the shows, everybody was criticizing Pamela Geller. Not the jihadis who tried to kill her, but Pamela for putting on the event. And it seems as if everybody took for granted on CNN and even on Fox, people who should have had more sense, like Laura Ingraham and others, they were taking for granted the idea that if Muslims say they're going to kill you for drawing Muhammad, then you better not draw Muhammad. You have to retreat from your freedom in this regard and give them what they want and submit to this violent intimidation. And so people have already internalized in the space between Rushdie and Geller, 1989 to 2015, they've internalized the idea, many Americans, even many influential Americans, like Bill O'Reilly and Laura Ingraham, they have accepted the idea that you must not offend Islam, and you just don't do something that Muslims find offensive. It's your fault if Muslims are violent as a result of that.
Yeah, David, did you want to add anything to that, or no?
No, it's and this goes back to what Robert was saying earlier, that when you say, hey, Muslims are going to kill you over this cartoon, therefore don't post the cartoon, you've just given them the encouragement that they need, right? That doesn't reduce the violence, that encourages the violence. The message that sends to jihadis worldwide is you can get your way, right? If you want to stop people from criticizing Muhammad, violence is the path. It's not reasoning with them about whether they should be doing this or whether it's a good thing to do. It's killing people over it, and that's the path. And it's not just on the cartoons. The message that sends is, if you ultimately want your way in the West, guess what? They'll just back down from violence. So just be as violent as possible, and they'll back down. They as much as they may be concerned about their rights, they're not concerned about them to the point where they're willing to die for them. Unlike so many other Americans and Westerners down through history who were willing to die for them, now they're too comfortable And if you start threatening them and intimidating them, they'll back down. And so when reporters and politicians and Hollywood send that as one massive message to the Islamic world, hey, if you want us to stop talking about Muhammad, if you want to control the entire population of the West, just be as violent as possible. To assume that that is going to reduce violence in the world is beyond idiotic. So that would be my perspective.
Gotcha. And a couple more questions. And before we go, just everybody that's watching live right now, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Also subscribe to Acts 17 Apologetics and Jihad Watch for more. And also share this video with on your feed, your social media accounts, so that way more people can see it. What do you guys think about the role for moderate Muslims? So what would you advise for moderate Muslims? Do you think that they should stand with us in this, or should they, defend the extremeness or kind of the censoring, or what do you guys think?
Well, John, it really depends on what you mean by moderate Muslims. There is a fictional moderate Muslim that the establishment media assumes exists, and that is a Muslim who believes in peace and brotherhood as taught by the authentic understanding of the Quran. Now, the authentic understanding of the Quran does not actually teach peace or brotherhood or the equality of rights of all people before the law. There are a lot of Muslims who don't pay attention to what the Quran really does teach, and so you could call them moderate Muslims because they're never going to wage jihad. But that doesn't mean that they have any theological leg to stand on within Islam. And then there are moderate Muslims who are deceivers, who say that Islam really doesn't teach any violence. Islam really teaches peace and properly understood, and they're living it out. There are plenty of those making lots of money speaking to infidel audiences that are very anxious to be reassured and to be fooled, and who don't know enough about the subject to respond to what is happening. But a Muslim who genuinely rejects the teachings of warfare and subjugation and sex slavery and all the rest of it that's in the Quran and in the Sunnah ought to be standing with us, certainly, and standing with Tommy Robinson as well in trying to call attention to these matters so as to effect genuine reform. But I couldn't name a single person who is actually like that in the world today.
Yeah, as far as peaceful Muslims. So the Muslim you would meet on your college campus who has no thoughts of waging jihad or something like that. The disturbing trend I find is that they tend to be upset about the wrong things, right? In other words, you can take your average peaceful Muslim who doesn't want to wage jihad, doesn't like ISIS, doesn't approve of ISIS, doesn't approve of terrorist attacks. For some reason, when I'm talking to them, I still find out that they get massively more upset that, there's a cartoon contest or something like that than they do about a terrorist attack. So I say, hey, what do you think about that terrorist attack? Oh yeah, that's bad. That's some bad stuff there. I condemn that. And I say, okay, what do you think about the Israel situation? Oh my goodness! And then they flip out, right? And so it's you should. I mean, I'm thinking from a Christian perspective, right? If someone was drawing an offensive picture about Jesus on one corner, and down the other corner there was a Christian out murdering people in the name of Jesus, I would be way more upset about the Christian murdering people in the name of Jesus. I would be much more upset about that person than I am about the other person who's drawing a mean picture. So even with moderate Muslims, their perspectives and what really bothers them seems to be massively skewed. Like there's a problem with the moral compass. Now to be clear, there, I'm not questioning whether they really condemn terrorism. So I've known lots of Muslims. I've known lots of Muslims who left Islam, and so I have no doubt about what their true positions were as a Muslim. Like when Nabil left, when Nabil became a Christian, he didn't say, I was trying to kill you the entire time, David. I was planning to kill you. No, he sincerely believed what he was telling me about Islam being peaceful. But as far as where they should be standing, guess what? If you are a genuinely peaceful Muslim who doesn't believe in Muhammad's command to fight unbelievers until they say there's no God but Allah, of course you need to be standing on our side, because you've seen what happens in areas of the world where the people who do take Muhammad's command to violently subjugate unbelievers, take over an area, they're out there killing the so-called moderate Muslims in massive numbers, right? Why? Because they regard you as apostates or heretics, right? If you're so far away from basic, if you're far enough away from basic Islamic teachings, they'll consider you apostates. Even if you have a slight deviation from something that Muhammad said, they'll regard you as a heretic, and they'll kill you too. So, peaceful Muslims who don't want to kill people, they need to understand that, you know, the worst you have to fear from people like me is that we're going to criticize your prophet, right? We're going to criticize your ideology. Now, if you can't deal with that, then I would question whether you're really moderate. If you cannot deal with that, but if you can deal with that, if you can deal with that sort of thing, then you should be on our side, because there are people in this world who are not going to tolerate any difference of opinion from you. I can tolerate difference of opinion, even from Muslims. There are people in the Muslim community who will not tolerate difference of opinion, even from other people who are Muslims. They will kill them. So people need to get some perspective on these issues.
Absolutely. Robert, did you want to add anything else to that? Or are you good?
I think that's David summed it up very well, really. And the problem here is that people don't understand what the meaning of moderate Muslim is, what the term is, what it means. They throw the term around without defining it. And there are so many different kinds of people to which it could refer that it really ends up just muddying the waters more than clarifying anything. The Muslims who are honest about what's in the Quran and Sunnah, and who even know that it's there and are honest about it, they should stand up and say that they repudiate these things. And as David says, there are many people who've left Islam as a result. At the same time, there are many people who bear the name of moderate who know very well what the Quran teaches, but are determined to deceive unbelievers about it. And there are so many unbelievers who are very happy to be deceived.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. One more question, and then we'll get to a few questions. Last question. What do you guys, in your opinion, what can we do, or is there anything we can do, or what should we do in support of Tommy in this situation?
Speak out. The government wants to silence anybody who speaks about these things. We're not in Britain, so they're not going to arrest us if we speak out about these things. And so we have all the more responsibility to do so, to make up for the gag that is on the freedom fighters in Britain who might speak out about this.
Yeah, and I would say if he's locked up for 13 months, then need to be speaking out about it for 13 months. And it's actually a similar situation, sadly, to the situations in the Muslim world where people say, hey, Robert or Pamela, why are you talking about honor killings in Muslim lands or these? Well, guess what? Because the locals can't speak out against it, right? The locals can't speak out against those things, or they'll be targets too. And so that's a sad situation in the Muslim world, that people in the Muslim world usually aren't free to challenge Muhammad's teachings about how to deal with apostates or how to deal with, rebellious women. They're not in a position to speak out against those things because they'll become targets. And so we're the only ones who can speak out against those things. But when we speak out against those, we get attacked. And now it's becoming a situation that's similar we have the parallel now in the West, where people in Great Britain aren't allowed to speak out against certain things. So now we have to speak out on their behalf here in the U.S. So sad situation, pathetic, really.
And when you're speaking to the U.S., would you give the same advice for the U.K.? Or, I mean, because I know they have a legitimate fear. I mean, a lot of them are scared to speak out, and they should be, because they could get arrested and, lose their jobs and all this or whatever.
Look, as far as that, right? As far as people in the UK, I would tell people in the UK, every last one of you who has an ounce of concern about the future of freedom of speech in the UK, march right down to those trials and do exactly what Tommy Robinson did. Nothing more. No violence, no threats. Don't attack police. Don't attack anyone. Go and do exactly what he did and say why you're doing it. I'm doing that. I wasn't going to come down here to this courthouse and talk about the trial. But now I have to, because you started arresting people over it. And guess what? Let them arrest you, right? Let me get some of the greatest movements in history, the civil rights movement in the U.S. That's what they did. You're telling us we can't do this, but we understand we have to do it anyway, even if you lock us up. And they got locked up for it, and they got locked up for it, and they got locked up for it, and then they won, right? Because people start catching on. Wait a minute, because guess what? Again, if it's just Tommy, that's one thing. If person after person after person gets arrested just for trying to report on little girls being gang raped, then eventually you would win enough public support that they would change that government. People would change that government. They would vote. They would vote in. At the end of the day, Western nations are variations of different kinds of democracies. So if you want enough public support, people are going to adapt. The media are going to adapt. The government's going to adapt, and so that's how you win. But if you sit back and do nothing, you've already lost.
John, it's the same thing in Britain as it is in another totalitarian state, the Islamic Republic of Iran. If more people rise up, the less the government can do about it. They can't arrest the whole country. They don't have many prison cells. The more people who take the risk and stand up and do what David said, the better off Britain will be today and in the future, and the more likely it will be able to recover a sense of itself as a free society.
Absolutely. All right, I agree. Let's get to some questions now. You guys go ahead and send in your questions. Let's see. Trying to scroll up to find them. Guys, send in your questions right now. Okay. Okay, it says, this one's from Mackenzie Kim. It says, would you guys be willing to reach out to Sikh Awareness Society to help them? They've worked with Christians for the past 20 years, spread awareness of grooming gang, warning signs, and motivations.
Sure. They're in Britain? I guess so. Look, the thing is that I've been banned from Britain for the last 5 years. The British government sent me a letter saying, you say that Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers. And so therefore they were banning me from the country. It's another example of how they're at war with reality. It's demonstrably true that Islam has doctrines of warfare against unbelievers, but I can't go into Britain as a result. So I'd be happy to help from a distance, but that's the best I can do.
Yeah, we're kind of doing what we can do from a distance, which is keeping people informed. But notice what Robert just said there. You're saying something that we don't want to hear, therefore we're banning you. That should have clued people in, and it did clue lots of people in. There were even people who didn't agree with Robert and Pamela who were saying, nevertheless, they shouldn't be banned from a country. But the response should have been, if you are in a position of power in the UK and you think this person is going to come and say something that's false, the response should have been, hey, Robert and Pamela, when you get here, we're having a massive public debate. We're going to sit you down with some Muslim scholars and give you guys both equal time to present your views. We're going to take questions from the audience, and we're going to expose your ideas as false. And that way, when you're walking down the street and you've been completely humiliated on live television, then people will know not to take you seriously. That's how you would deal with it if you really, really thought that he was wrong. The fact that you simply say, we're not allowing you in the country, I think you are onto things, right? I think you are. I think you do know that he would win in a discussion like that. And so, yeah, that's the sad situation. In the name of the good of the country, we have to ban people from the country who say things that we don't like, and now, of course, lock people up from reporting on things that we don't want them to report on. And this is the direction that UK is heading. So, yeah, guys, you do need help in lots of ways.
All right. Question from Umeka Stone says, do we know of other religions which do the grooming rape gangs?
I don't. David, you know any?
No, you to be clear, you could have people from any background, right? You could have a group of guys who grow up in the United States and are Christian or Jewish or Hindu and just have lost all direction, and they end up becoming rapists or something like that. You could have that. You could have that sort of thing. Outside of Islam, it's normally gangs or groups of friends that if they're going to gang rape someone or something like that, it's a group of guys at a party or something like that. But notice, I mean, in Islam, in the UK, these are guys who take Islam seriously, right? They're showing up with appropriate beards and kufis and so on. They're taking this somewhat seriously. And not only that, over and over again, as information about the grooming gangs came out, I noticed over and over again, it was a family affair, right? And what I mean there is you'd have these guys who are brothers and they're in on it, or these guys who are father and son and they're in on it. And I mean, these guys who are friends, and I mean, just think about this situation, John, Robert. If you think about your friends, I'm thinking about my friends. If I called up my friends one day and I said, "Hey, Guillaume, you know, hey, there's this 11-year-old girl I've been scoping out. How about we get together and gang rape her?" I have no friend. I have no friend who would think that was a good idea, right? But these guys do, right? These guys do. It's, hey, we've got this girl. Let's go ahead and gang rape her. And hey, my brother's going to think that's a good idea. Oh, my cousin, he's going to think that's a good idea. Oh, all my best friends are going to think that's a good idea. Why would you guys think that's a good idea? You obviously haven't been influenced by anything remotely resembling a Western value if you think that's a good idea. Where are you getting your concept that that's a good idea? Well, as far as how you can treat unbelievers, you do get that concept from Islam, and so it's no coincidence that this is where we see this coming from.
Cool. Question from, let's see, Warrior Woman. Good to read from you. She says, question, do each of you discuss going against Islam with your wives due to the imminent threats you receive? I do, because I think it's fair. Do you guys discuss it with your wives about the threats and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, I did years ago. It's kind of old news now.
Yeah.
But we decided that there are some things that are more important. You know, it's like it's not as if you're going to live forever if you don't stand up for what's right. And like Stéphane Charbonnier, Charb, the editor of Charlie Hebdo, who was killed in the massacre there by jihadis in January 2015, he said, "I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees." And certainly this is something that I believe all of us would agree this is worth doing for our children, for our grandchildren, whatever happens to us. And so it's really just not an issue as a result.
Yeah, it's I'm like Robert. It's kind of old news. Because this has been going on for years in my family. But it's not just the wives. You have to eventually tell the kids as well, right? I mean, I was away when we got arrested in Dearborn, and Dearborn, another free speech issue, which we won. When Dearborn kept making us come to court, and I would have to be away, and in the meantime, people are sending us death threats saying they're going to kill us. My wife had to sit down my two sons, Luke and Blaze, who I don't remember how old they were at the time, but like 6 and 8 or 5 and 7, and she had to sit them down and tell them, guys, if anyone ever comes into this apartment to hurt me, and you hear me being hurt and you hear me screaming, I don't want you to come help me. I want you to hide. And even if you hear me screaming, I want you to hide, because just know if you're worried about me, that I'm more worried about you than I'm worried about myself. So don't try to help. And so, you know, that's something you shouldn't have to tell little kids. You shouldn't have to tell little kids, hey, someone might be coming in here to kill us, because they say they're going to come in and do that. We're getting messages saying they're going to come and do that. So that was the message for a while. Now, just so everyone knows, years later, when the kids started getting bigger, I sat them down when they were, I think, 10 and 12, and I sat them down there and I said, hey, you guys remember what Mom told you when she was telling you what to do if anyone ever came in here and was hurting her? She told you to go hide. So that rule's about to change, kids, because you're getting bigger, and I'm sending you to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai and boxing lessons. And if anyone ever comes in here and hurts your mother, you defend her with your life. So So they were excited about that. But that's kind of the situation if you're dealing with Islam. There are people who are saying they're going to kill you for criticizing Islam. And even if you think, well, 99% of these guys are just a bunch of liars, they're cowards. These are guys who wouldn't bust a grape in a food fight. They're not going to do anything. Well, if even 1% of these guys are serious, well, that's already several people who are who would like to kill me. So yeah, they are out there, and you have to be concerned. But yeah, like Robert and his wife, if you think there are things that are more important, you have to do it. And guess what? This is everyone who's ever stood up for anything important down through history, right? I mean, the founding fathers of the United States, when they're signing that declaration, they may be signing their death certificates from Great Britain, right, to come and kill them, and on from there. Anytime you're standing up for something where you could be beaten and killed for it, well, you just got to do it. And if we don't do it, then no one's going to do it. And guess what? Catch up with the world in 50 years from now and see what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And we keep getting a whole bunch of questions kind of around the same thing. So we discussed it, but they want to just repeat it again. Do you guys think that the UK is doomed? And also, what can we do to fight against the UK and try to prevent it from happening in America?
It's never over. It's never over. Even if they win, even if Sharia is imposed in the UK, it's not over. Because then there's the resistance. And the resistance, there are precedents. There aren't very many, to tell you the truth, but there are precedents of Sharia states being rolled back and non-Muslims regaining their freedom. Spain being the most noteworthy and important, but it also happened in other areas of the world, including some parts of India and elsewhere. And so it's never over. People who are free should always fight to defend their freedom. And that's just the bottom line. If they don't do so, they will certainly lose it.
Yeah, and I agree that it's certainly not over. And I'll go ahead and give my view. I don't think that Islam is going to win in Europe. I don't think it's going to happen. The situation that arises is, I think that the West can win mainly by speech and by refuting ideas. Of course, you have to deal with terrorist threats and things like that. But I think you can win this ideologically by standing up for your rights and by making it very clear to everyone involved that threats and intimidation aren't going to work. And if you threaten someone, then people are going to speak even more. If you criticize, if you want to kill someone for drawing a picture of your prophet, then guess what? Millions of people are then going to draw a picture of your prophet. And so stop trying to control people through violence. I think you can win this ideologically just by seriously taking the ideology and publicly refuting it. Because I don't think Islam can stand up to criticism, right? I believe your average Muslim, if all of the information about Muhammad is on the table, I don't believe he's going to remain a Muslim, or at the very least, I think he'll be a very weak Muslim, right? He's not going to take this stuff very seriously because you can't. But what happens is everyone in the education system is telling Muslims Islam is wonderful. Their leaders are all telling them Islam is wonderful. The government's telling them Islam is wonderful. Hollywood is telling them Islam is wonderful. And then it's a couple people like us who are telling you, actually, you got some problems here. Let's look at them. And so we look like we don't know what we're talking about because there's a unified voice of everyone else telling them Islam is wonderful. I think if that voice ever becomes, hey, look at what your prophet was actually like, I think you're going to see Muslims leaving Islam in record numbers, and that after that it's not a serious threat. So I believe that could happen, right? At the end of the day, I mentioned that the media are businesses. Governments, elected officials can be bypassed by electing other officials. Hollywood is a business. If you get fed up with something Hollywood does and you stop watching the movies, then they have to adapt. The education system has to adapt. If you stop sending your students to a certain school because they're lying to people, they have to adapt. If you stop sending your funding checks, your checks that you send to the university to fund the university because you don't like what they're doing there, they have to adapt. And so all of this comes down to having an informed population of free people. If you have an informed population of free people, they will have enough influence over the media and over the governments and over Hollywood to make the necessary changes to refute Islam at the ideological level. If that doesn't happen, I think you end up with a violent revolution. I think you end up with a bloodbath, right? I think you end up with enough fed up people that they will violently resist Islam. And so that's what I would like to see avoided, right? I'd like to just refute Islam. I'd like to just expose Muhammad. I'd like to just show that the Quran is not the word of God and that people shouldn't be following it. I'd love for that to happen enough to where Europe isn't conquered. But if Europe were on the verge of being conquered, in other words, if people reject everything I'm saying, they reject what Robert says, they reject us, and they just keep defending Islam and keep promoting Islam as this great and wonderful thing and keep silencing people, keep locking people up for criticizing Islam, then I think that as things get worse and worse and worse and the rape gangs continue doing their work, I think you eventually get enough people who are fed up that you end up with a European war, a European bloodbath. And I don't think the Europeans would lose that. So I think Europe will end up dealing with Islam one way or another. I would just like to see Islam dealt with peacefully. Again, there are certain situations where you can't respond to it peacefully. If there's a terrorist attack, you have to respond to that as you respond to a terrorist attack. But I believe on the whole, Islam can be refuted as an ideology. And if that doesn't happen, if the people who are promoting dealing with Islam through speech lose, and the voices who want to crush all speech win, I think people are still going to rise up. They're just not going to be rising up with speech. They're going to be rising up with weapons. And so I don't believe so. Just to be clear, I don't think that Europe loses that situation. I just don't want it to become as bloody as it can become.
And one way that you're trying to get a lot of this information out and the sources and stuff is through our Islamicize Me project, right? Is that
he plugged the Islamicize Me project?
Yeah, but that's part of the reason why. So for those that are probably watching that may not understand the intent, that's one of the reasons why, right? To kind of get this information out there for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, and by the way, think of the people here and people who are watching that's inspired by a true story of the people involved. So Vocab Malone, who's in the Islamicize Me series, and I'm sure John will put a link to that here at the bottom or at the end, so people can follow that. But Vocab Malone, friends with me and John, knew one of the terrorists who went and tried to kill Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller and anyone else who was there. And so he was a convert to Islam. This guy converted to Islam, became radicalized, took Muhammad's commands seriously, became a fan of Osama bin Laden, and then went and tried to go on a killing spree of people who criticized Islam. And so we're making a sort of mockumentary inspired by that. What happens when 3 ordinary guys convert to Islam, but start taking everything Muhammad said very seriously? Look at what you get. And we're trying to make fun of the entire process. Why? Because someone needs to do that. Because whether people like it or not, there are people who convert to Islam, think that they have good reasons to convert to Islam, and then start doing what Muhammad says. And how do you expose that? How do you expose that? Someone needs to expose it. For the people who are saying, hey, you guys are being too mean. Well, if you come up with some more brilliant way of exposing Muhammad's teachings and showing people, no, you shouldn't be converting to this, and you certainly shouldn't be going out and killing over this nonsense. If you come up with some better way, I'll do that. In the meantime, I'm just going to make fun of the insanely idiotic things that Muhammad said, and there are books full of them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Vocab, Robert, did you know Vocab before this happened? You did, right? Or
yeah, well, not very well. I was on his show, his podcast or whatever it is. I'm sorry, I'm not technological, but I was on it a couple times, maybe before.
I was on the interwebs with him.
You what now?
I was on the interwebs with him.
Yes, the interwebs. That's right. I met him on the interwebs. And, I was very surprised when he told me that he knew Ibrahim Simpson, one of the people who tried to kill us at the Muhammad cartoon contest, and that he and Ibrahim would have theological discussions. But it only underscores the importance of what David is saying, that if people knew about what is in these texts and what people like Elton Simpson, who became Ibrahim Simpson, take seriously when they convert to Islam, then I think that would make a tremendous difference. And I hope it does it through this Islamicize Me project. I've been enjoying every episode and looking forward to the end of the month when, of course, it's going to get a whole lot more exciting.
That's right. And I guess final question for you guys then. Why do you do what you do? Like in a nutshell, because I mean, all of us, but especially you guys, really put your lives on the line every single day. Robert, you've been poisoned. You've got that attempted murder that we just discussed. I mean, a lot of people want you guys dead. So why do you do what you do?
You know, John, all my life, when I was a kid, I remember reading stories about various people, heroes, like, I don't know, Nathan Hale, people like that, the guy who said, I regret I have but one life to give for my country, people who stood on principle even when it cost them their lives. Speaking of mockery and making fun of these ridiculous things that Muhammad is attributed to have said in the Hadith, I think of Thomas More, who's another one who gave his life for what he thought was right. And he said, the devil is a proud spirit, cannot endure to be mocked, which I think means, well, you got to mock him all the more then. And if you have this evil system that makes people do evil things and think that they're good, then it has to be mocked. But in any case, I don't, you know, one thing led to another and I got into this, but I think that I always learned that people who stood for what was right, even when it was risky, were people to be emulated. And what I don't understand nowadays is that we live in an age of universal cowardice, where cowardice is taken for granted and people think you're nuts if you stand on principle even when it's risky. But I don't understand where it changed. It seemed as if everybody took this for granted when I was a kid. I know that was a very long time ago, though.
Yeah, me dealing with Islam sort of came in stages. At first, I was just dealing with Islam because my best friend was a Muslim, and he was telling me that Islam is true. So I start reading his sources, and later on, he left Islam and became a Christian. And I thought, cool, I'm done with Islam. I don't have to deal with Islam anymore, because I was more interested in other things. I'm more interested in philosophy. I'm more interested in studying the great ideas of history and philosophy of science and philosophy of religion. More interested in discussing those kinds of ideas, or if I'm discussing the ideas of, you know, people who are critiquing Christianity, I'm more interested in the objections of atheists, like the problem of evil and things like that. So I wasn't really interested in Islam just because of Islam. And so once my friend Nabil left Islam, I thought I was done with it. And of course, then he starts getting death threats, and Muslims are challenging him to debate and me to debate. And still for the first couple of years, I think I'm going to be done with Islam. But, you know, during that time, he's getting death threats and so on. And think about this, because if I criticize Islam, people say, oh, you're a bigot. Well, if my best friend was under a death sentence for leaving Islam, and there are people who are saying they're going to carry out that death sentence, they're saying they're going to kill him. And I say, why? They say, well, because the Prophet commanded it. How do you not say something about that? I don't regard you as a man if you don't speak out on something like that. So I had to keep talking about it. And then over time, I realized, well, it's not just my friend here. There are people all over the world, Muslims and non-Muslims, who are being oppressed by this ideology. They're being physically oppressed. They're being psychologically oppressed by this ideology. Many of them can't speak out. So of all the things that I could be doing in my life, maybe I shouldn't be just sitting around reading philosophy books because that's what I'm interested in. Maybe I have to deal with this because someone has to deal with it, and it might as well be us.
Gotcha. Well, hey, I appreciate both of you guys coming on, man. Good to see both of you again too. And what we'll have to do is we'll have to get all of us and Sam Shamoon and Vocab and everybody on something later on down the road. Maybe when the series is over or something like that, we can all get together and chat. But appreciate you guys' insights, and I'll put a link to your guys' pages down in the description. If you guys if you're not already following their channels, make sure you do, and appreciate it. So we will be in touch, and thank you guys for your time. And thanks again for you guys for coming on.
Thank you, John.
All right, catch you later.